I'm back. Mr. Clarke's back. Time to take a look at the Industrial Revolution. As we move forward into the Industrial Revolution, we're going to look at how changes in agriculture helped to spark the Industrial Revolution. We're looking at why the Industrial Revolution began in Great Britain. We'll look at the role of steam technology and textile manufacturing during the Industrial Revolution. We'll look at how the factory system and transportation revolution advanced industry. And we'll trace how the Industrial Revolution would begin to spread throughout all of Europe and eventually into the United States. Okay, for thousands of years, how did most people in society live? Well, right up until the mid 1700s, the majority of all humans lived and worked in some form of farming, usually in small farming villages, small tight-knit communities. They kind of mostly self-reliant at that point in time. And when you look at the Industrial Revolution, this is where we're going to see a shift from the small farming villages eventually into bigger cities. When did the Industrial Revolution begin? 1750s, so right in the middle of the 1700s. Now, there's not like a definitive date. It didn't start on February 3rd, 1750, but rather during that period of time in the middle 1700s is when the Industrial Revolution really started to take hold. And it started, as we see with question 3, where did the Industrial Revolution begin? It began in Great Britain. Great Britain was the center at that point in time of, they had a big colonial empire. They had conquered a good portion of the planet, and as a result, they were moving forward and modernizing. During the 1750s, how did people live their lives? So now we're going to see a little bit of a change. Still kind of a simple lifestyle, but most of them still worked the land. They were using handmade tools. They lived in small cottages. At this point in time, their cottages were lit by firelight and candles. They made their own clothes. They grew their own food. Often they would barter or trade for what they needed. During the 1750s, before the Industrial Revolution, why did most people see very little of the world? Well, most people traveled by foot or horse-drawn cart during that period of time, so the amount of area that you could cover was kind of narrow or not too far. Only a few braved the seas during that period of time. During that period of time, there were still a lot of rumors about the dangers of the sea and the idea that even there might be sea monsters out there. I mean, they were being dispelled, these rumors, but for long periods of time, for many centuries, there's a lot of fear, of going on the open seas. So the limited distance people could travel meant they did not really experience very much of the world. Six, what does rural mean? Provide an antonym for rural or something that means the opposite. So rural means relating to country or simple life. Examples of the rural way of life in the 1750s included living on a farm or in a small village, we mentioned earlier, living by candlelight, farming with handmade tools, growing food, making clothes at home, and going to nearby markets. The opposite of rural is urban, and as we move forward, we'll be looking at some of the distinctive differences between urban and rural America and the world. By the 1850s, what had happened to many of these villages? This is about 100 years after the Industrial Revolution had begun. Many of these country villages had begun to sprout into more industrialized towns, small cities, and were moving in contemporary times.
Mr. Massa, please contact the front office. Mr. Massa, please contact the front office.
8, what were some changes that people lived in these new experienced in these new cities? So what were some changes people living in cities experienced? Well, instead of just simply growing their own food, many of them were now shopping for food. They were shopping for clothing. So instead of very simple hand-stitched clothing at home, they were a little bit more stylish. For a long period of time, if you had your own farm and your own home on the farm, you had a lot of space, usually had a bigger home. Here now they were living in crowded multi-story homes like apartment complexes or tenements. Now they're also working, instead of for themselves, they were working for somebody else, and they were now receiving hourly wages. And initially, in some of the first factories, these wages were very low. 9 had the scientific revolution. Now, once again, one of the key things you try and do as we move forward throughout the year is when we learn about concepts, periods of time, changes within society, we kind of think about those as we move forward in the context of the contemporary times we're looking at. So reflecting back a couple hundred years into the scientific revolution is still going to impact society here in the 17th and 18th century. Scientific inquiry led to a new spirit of invention. New inventions helped to fuel the Industrial Revolution by providing the machines to more quickly and easily produce goods in factories. Next, we'll look at the Agricultural Revolution and how we were able to obtain food products. So 10, what was the first agricultural revolution? And then, of course, what was the second? The first agricultural revolution occurred when humans first learned to farm and domesticate animals. So instead of just being hunters and gatherers and nomadic people, they began to settle into a particular spot to grow crops and domesticate and kind of herd animals and keep them in one spot. By the 1700s, improved quantity and quality of farm products led to a second agricultural revolution. So those are the two periods of time. What did the Dutch do during the 1700s that helped start the second agricultural revolution? Well, the Dutch, they had to deal with a lot of flooding issues and a lot of water issues, so they built earthen walls known as dikes to reclaim land from the sea so that the land would not be completely flooded out. They combined smaller fields into larger fields, and they used fertilizer from livestock to replenish soil. If you look at the image here, you can see how they kind of built up the land there to kind of hold back the waterways. So in a dike like this, a wall of mounded earth blocks the flow of water onto a field. Trees are planted on the top of the dike because they are roots and they kind of keep that strong and together. So that's kind of the early strategy that many of them had to hold back the floods. 12, what did the British do to expand on the work of the Dutch? So we're going to see this too. A lot of the different countries are going to look at what other countries did and kind of make decisions themselves to kind of perfect or build upon those ideas. But in the case of the British, farmers began to mix soils together to get better crop yields. They began to use crop rotation so that they would kind of divide the fields into 4. And then every 4 years, they would have a break for a piece of land, so you kind of rotate it around. Charles Townshend urged farmers to grow turnips, which was a good way to replenish the nutrients in the soil. Jethro Tull invented the seed drill to plant seeds into the soil, which sped up the process. These are all advancements that the British had to help out with farming. 13, how did improvements in communication help the ideas of the agricultural revolution to spread more rapidly? A new invention spread throughout Europe and America rapidly as other inventors began to further develop new ideas. So if you have a small-scale idea, it gets people thinking about it, and they kind of look as to ways to kind of build upon those ideas. 14, what was the enclosure movement? This is when wealthy farmers began to protect individual profit by fencing in their farmland and preventing other people's animals from grazing on their land or farming the particular land. Previously, they had shared a lot of their land with the peasants because without advanced equipment and technologies, they really have a lot of use for their entire land. But now that they can profit from the land, they didn't necessarily want to share in those profits. You look at the visual there, the enclosure movement, they close it in either with farms with fences or hedges. And you can see, throughout the countryside there, as far as you can see back into the photo, you can see the elevated areas, which are either the fences or the hedges that are grown high to protect off their land. Okay, 15, why do wealthy landowners change? And I kind of alluded to this. Prior to the advancement of technology, they could not farm all the land that they own. Therefore, the land the peasants used was land the landowners didn't use anyway. Sometimes they would take that land and either rent it out for a tenant farmer, or sometimes the peasant farmers could pay for the land usage through some of their crop yields. 16, what was the impact of the enclosure movement? Output and profits increased for the wealthy farmers. Efficiency increased. Farm laborers lost their jobs. Small farmers went out of business. Village population shrank as people had to move to the cities for work. So in some ways, the settlement of cities during this period of time in history was almost like a forced action because of the enclosure movement. 17, what impact did the agricultural revolution have on population? The increasing supply of food led to the decline of famine. This combined with medical improvements, improved sanitation and hygiene, led to an increasing life expectancy and a population explosion throughout all of Europe and the United States. Looking at some statistics there to give you some context from 1700 to 1800. Population of Great Britain nearly doubled from 1700 to 1800. Similarly, all of Europe nearly doubled as well from 1700 to 1800. I would say the population growth was a little higher in Great Britain than overall Europe in general. In 19, from the origins of human history through the 1700s, what was the primary source of energy for work? Humans. The muscles of humans and animals got work done. There wasn't a lot of equipment or anything like that aided in that process. 20, how would the steam engine improve industry? Well, steam engines provided the needed power to run machines. Steam powered, and I have to just adjust that for you there real fast in real time. Steam powered machines were much faster than the manually operated ones. 21, why was coal a vital power source? Well, coal was needed to provide the energy for the steam engines. As a result, coal mining became a very important job that employed many people in order to supply enough coal to factories. Who were the two men that developed the steam engine? In 1712, Thomas Newcomen developed the very first steam engine, and then in 1769, as we had alluded to before, often we try and improve upon earlier designs of equipment. Scottish engineer James Watt in 1769 improved on Newcomen's design and developed a more sophisticated steam engine that became the foundation for all power during the Industrial Revolution. There's a little cartoon visual of the steam engine. Watt's engine used steam and atmospheric pressure to power pistons and rods that move machinery. It had a separate condenser to keep the water hot, which also conserved energy. 23, how did Britain's overseas empire contribute to its role in starting the Industrial Revolution? Well, because Great Britain had an empire overseas, it had trading partners and access to more raw materials. Additionally, trade provided the capital or the money that was needed to develop new businesses. 24, what role did wealthy investors play in promoting the Industrial Revolution? Well, they invested the money in the new enterprises. They had the capital to buy factories, machines, equipment, and raw materials, and potentially a way to make a profit. #25, explain the 4 factors of production that are needed in order to produce goods. Well, the 4 factors of production: natural resources, which are needed for making goods; land, which provides the area for factories and warehouses; labor is the number of people who are able to work, and enough laborers are needed to run machinery, equipment, and work in factories; capital, which is the investment money needed to purchase raw materials and pay salaries and other business expenses; and a 5th one could be entrepreneurship, an individual who's willing to take the risk necessary to start a new enterprise. So if you look at England or Great Britain here in 1750, you can see the different things that they had within their country. From the key there, you see coal fields, rivers, copper mining, iron extraction, linen, metalware, shipbuilding, tin, and woolen cloth. And most importantly, for the 17 and 1800s, they had the ports there as an island nation to get goods and supplies in and out quite easily. It's especially true as you're thinking about the movement of people, goods, and supplies to their colonies. 26, how did the putting out system work to create textile products prior to the Industrial Revolution? So this is an older way of doing things. So previous to the Industrial Revolution, I'm just going to make this a little smaller here temporarily. Raw materials, cotton and silk, would be distributed to peasant families, as you can see here on the image. People would spin and create threads by hand. Thread would be sent to skilled artisans to make cloth. So it was a very simple and complex process, one in which took a great deal of time to handle. In 700 industrialization, doom of the putting out system. The new machinery could spin and weave cloth much more rapidly and efficiently, effectively putting these people out of business. They had to look for a new career. 28, why did the flying shuttle require the invention of the spinning jenny? The flying shuttle allowed weavers to make cloth faster. The weavers demanded more thread so they could make more cloth. The spinning jenny was invented to meet that demand. The spinning jenny could spin several...
Ms. Work, please contact the main office. Ms. Work, please contact the main office.
The spinning jenny could spin several threads at once, helping to fulfill the demand for thread by weavers. 29, how did Eli Whitney help the economy of the American South? The cotton in the South had seeds and dirt that needed to be removed by hand, requiring significant amounts of labor. By inventing a machine that could pull the cotton seeds out from the fiber, this greatly increased the demand for cotton because they can now pick through these seeds on the cotton much more rapidly. So in many ways, Whitney helped to expand the Southern economy, and it also led to an increase in the demand for slave labor, unfortunately, in the South. 30, what was the relationship between the invention of the water frame and the location of the earliest sheds used for manufacturing? Why were early steam-powered factories built in locations that were different from those of the earliest sheds? The water frame was a spinning machine that used the energy of water power, thus needed to be near a water source. So the earliest sheds used in manufacturing were built near streams to tap into the water power. Later on, steam engines replaced water-powered machines, so factories no longer needed to be near a source of water. So that's an important aspect of coal, the coal steam engine. You can see with the imagery here of the steam engine train, one of the big negatives of a coal-powered steam engine is the pollution, that black soot that kind of gets left behind in the wake of a train or the equipment. Describe the sequence of improvements in transportation and explain how each improvement contributed to the Industrial Revolution. Turnpikes, which are roadways which were paid for with tolls, allowed for the movement of supplies and finished products. They were invested by entrepreneurs who hoped to facilitate trade while at the same point in time making a profit from the roadways. Canals were built to connect waterways and help coal move easier. Railroads replaced canals as the main means of transportation because they could be built on land. So the evolution of transportation was basically from ships to steam engines. 32, explain how iron production and railroading are interrelated. Because both trains and tracks are made of iron, railroading is dependent upon the production of iron. You look at the map there, you can see canals and railroads in England in 1920. 33, how did Britain try to maintain its lead as the first nation to industrialize? In Great Britain, the British government passed strict laws regulating the exportation of new inventions so that other countries would not be able to industrialize like they had. So they basically tried to keep a monopoly on industrialization as long as possible. 34, after the new inventions of the textile industry reached the United States, what advantage did the United States have over Great Britain? Well, the United States had more natural resources than Great Britain, including coal and iron. The United States borrowed inventions rather than needing the time to create them from scratch and to improve on them. The United States was very quick to industrialize. Lesson reflection. What were the revolutionary aspects of the Industrial Revolution? Well, that's the idea of a revolution is a complete change. So there was a complete change in how goods were produced, how people got around in terms of transportation. Entrepreneurs invested in new technologies. They were much more efficient in the methods in agriculture. And then the life expectancy and populations increased. So take a moment or two to get down anything you need. Hopefully you enjoyed our initial discussion of the Industrial Revolution. And until next time, Mr. Clarke is